Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The rallying cry was Occupy Wall Street. The idea was to come down here to make your voice heard about the injustices of Wall Street and the financial system, and the idea just spread like wildfire. And it was always understood that the process was always going to rule. The process of building consensus and arriving at our demands, at our action plan, that has always been the driving factor here.
Today, as the numbers swell and the media debates just who these people are, we pack up our gear and head to the Occupy Wall Street encampment to hear people speaking for themselves. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Police raided the Occupy Boston encampment early this morning, arresting about 100 peaceful demonstrators in the latest crackdown on protests linked to the Occupy Wall Street movement. Some 200 police officers, including many in riot gear, approached the protest site at about 1:30 this morning. Police began making arrests after giving protesters 2 minutes to disperse. One Vietnam veteran said he was knocked to the ground during the arrests. Organizers of Occupy Boston said the police arrested a legal observer from the National Lawyers Guild and 4 medics who were attempting to care for protesters injured in the police raid. The arrest came hours after thousands of people marched in one of the largest protests organized by Occupy Boston. Many students from local colleges took part. Meanwhile, in Illinois, thousands took to the streets of Chicago in a solidarity protest with Occupy Wall Street. A coalition called Stand Up Chicago organized the march to protest the Futures Industry Association and the American Mortgage Bankers Association. Police arrested 26 demonstrators, many wearing Chicago Teachers Union T-shirts, who linked arms and sat down chanting, "Save our schools, save our homes." In New York, Mayor Michael Bloomberg suggested Monday protesters at Occupy Wall Street could stay indefinitely. He told reporters, quote, "The bottom line is people want to express themselves, and as long as they obey the laws, we'll allow them to." Today is day 25 of the protest encampment in New York. It also looks like protests may continue indefinitely in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Park Police have agreed to extend a permit to allow the Occupy 2011 Stop the Machine protest to continue in Washington's Freedom Plaza near the White House for the next 4 months. Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink, said she plans to protest until there's change.
We are here to stay. We're here just like we were here yesterday and the day before yesterday and the day before that. It really doesn't matter to us that our permit has run out. We feel like this is a public square. We are the public, and we are occupying the square, so we will stay here.
In economic news, a new study by the Congressional Budget Office has found President Obama's jobs bill could be fully paid for by a proposed new tax on millionaires. The study said a proposed 5.6% surtax on millionaires would raise nearly $453 billion over 10 years, more than enough to pay for the $447 billion jobs bill. A new report details widespread and systemic torture at sites run by the U.S.-backed Afghan intelligence services and Afghan National Police. While the report does not assess whether American officials have known about the abuse, it does raise serious questions about whether the United States is benefiting from information obtained from torture victims. Made possible by interviews with over 300 prisoners over the last year, the report could set in motion American laws banning the U.S. from providing assistance to military units as suspects of torture, just as the United States is in the process of transferring power to the Afghan authorities. The UN report includes allegations of Afghan security officials hanging prisoners from hooks, beating them with cables, and twisting their genitals until they pass out. The Afghan government denies these accusations, but concedes the nation's detention system does suffer from some deficiencies. In Egypt, tens of thousands of Egyptians marched Monday in a massive funeral procession for 17 Christian protesters killed in a Cairo protest. Chants of "down with military rule" interrupted the prayers as mourners accused the military of bearing primary responsibility for the violence which led to the deaths of 26 people on Sunday. 500 people were injured. It was the worst violence in Egypt since Hosni Mubarak was ousted 7 months ago. Abuna Basilios, a Coptic priest in Cairo, said the military crackdown was not justified.
People went to the protest and they had not even begun their demonstration, and they were attacked right away. Also, if we suppose, just for the sake of argument, that they uttered something or even threw stones, for example, does that mean that armored personnel carriers and tanks should run people over, and that a young man should be crushed so that his head is split open?
Egyptian presidential candidate Amr Moussa condemned the violence.
This time, we are on the brink of a major clash, not just in Maspero, but also in other places in Egypt. Therefore, many of us see that democracy is the solution. It is the cure, not immediate decisions that are taken with no one knowing anything about it.
In other news from Egypt, Michael Nabil Sanad has entered the 50th day of a hunger strike. The 25-year-old blogger is serving a 3-year prison sentence for allegedly spreading false information about the army's behavior during the uprising earlier this year. New evidence suggests the army biologist the U.S. government has long blamed for the deadly anthrax attacks in 2001 may have been innocent of the allegations. A collaborative investigation by PBS's Frontline, McClatchy, and ProPublica has raised serious doubts about the government's case against Bruce Ivins. Ivins was an elite government scientist at a biodefense research lab at Fort Detrick, Maryland. He committed suicide soon after learning the Justice Department was about to file criminal charges against him for the 2001 anthrax attacks that killed 5 people and sickened 17 others, crippling the National Mail Service. He'd been part of a team that helped the government investigate the attacks and won the Pentagon's highest civilian award in 2003. Documents gathered through the investigation reveal for the first time Ivins made at least 3 spore samples available to authorities at the time he was being investigated, contradicting the government's argument that he tried to hide his guilt by submitting a false single set of samples in 2002. According to Ivins' attorney, the discovery debunks the claim that the biologist was trying to cover his tracks. Investigators who worked on the case now doubt whether a court would be able to convict Ivins based on the new information that's come to light. Democratic leaders in Wisconsin announced Monday they plan to launch an effort to recall Republican Governor Scott Walker beginning November 15th. Democrats will need to collect just over 540,000 signatures by January 13th in order to force a recall vote. 200,000 people have already pledged to sign recall petitions. Meanwhile, the Capital Times of Madison's reporting Walker has taken steps to take control of the Government Accountability Board, which oversees Wisconsin elections. Critics say such a move could give Walker power to veto any recall rule from the board that he doesn't like. In environmental news, the oil leak off the coast of New Zealand is now being described as the country's worst-ever maritime environmental disaster. Last week, a cargo ship hit a reef, causing a lengthy oil slick. On Monday, the oil leak increased 5-fold as rough weather jostled the ship. The Burmese military-backed government has announced it plans to release more than 6,300 prisoners today. The government described it as a form of humanitarian amnesty for prisoners who are old, disabled, unwell, or who had shown good moral behavior. It's not known how many of Burma's 2,000 political prisoners will be released. The move comes 6 months after former army officer Thein Sein became president, heading a military-backed government. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz is reporting the United Nations Human Rights Office has urged Israel to stop Jewish settlers from attacking Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. Rupert Colville, spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, told reporters in Geneva Israel has a legal obligation to protect Palestinian civilians and property in the occupied Palestinian territory. Colville said the wave of attacks occurring since September must be properly investigated and victims compensated. Meanwhile, Palestinian officials say 2 more members of the UN Security Council, Nigeria and Bosnia, have committed to support the Palestinian statehood bid at the UN. If true, this will mean the U.S. will be forced to use its veto power to block the measure. And the leading Republican presidential candidates are heading to New Hampshire today for their 7th debate. The debate is the first since business executive Herman Cain unexpectedly soared in the polls. The latest polling from New Hampshire indicates Cain is running second behind Mitt Romney. New Hampshire will host the nation's first primary in about 3 months. Part of tonight's debate will likely focus on Mitt Romney's record as governor of Massachusetts. NBC News has just revealed that newly obtained White House records provide fresh details on how senior Obama administration officials used Romney's landmark health care law in Massachusetts as a model for the new federal law. The record shows senior White House officials had a dozen meetings in 2009 with 3 of Romney's own health care advisors and experts who helped shape the health care reform law signed by Romney in 2006. One of those meetings on July 20th, 2009 was in the Oval Office and presided over by President Obama, the records show. Romney has forcefully defended the Massachusetts law he signed as called for the repeal of what has called Obamacare. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.